The war between Russia and Ukraine has entered another complex phase. Cross-border drone and missile attacks have expanded in frequency and geographic reach. Strategic infrastructure has been targeted. Civilian populations remain under threat. Yet amid this cycle of retaliation, peace talks have begun in Switzerland, a country long associated with neutrality and mediation. This moment raises pressing questions. Can diplomacy gain traction while both sides continue active military operations? Are the recent exchanges a signal of escalation or a calculated attempt to strengthen negotiating positions? And perhaps most critically, does Geneva represent a genuine opening for de-escalation or simply another pause in a protracted conflict? The answers are neither simple nor immediate. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is no longer a regional war confined to borders on a map. It has reshaped European security, redefined NATO's posture, altered global energy markets, and accelerated shifts in the international balance of power. Tonight we examine the latest exchange of attacks between Ukraine and Russia, the launch of peace discussions in Geneva, and the strategic implications of both developments. We will explore the military realities on the ground, the diplomatic maneuvering behind the scenes, the economic ripple effects, and the possible trajectories ahead. This is not a story of sudden breakthroughs or dramatic turning points. It is a careful analysis of a conflict that continues to evolve and of a diplomatic effort whose outcome may shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Let us begin with the facts. This week, Ukraine and Russia exchanged a new round of long-range drone and missile attacks, striking targets inside each other's territories. Ukrainian officials reported renewed Russian aerial assaults on energy facilities and military infrastructure. Russian authorities in turn confirmed drone incursions into several regions, including areas deep inside Russian territory, targeting logistics hubs and defense-related sites. The timing of these attacks is significant. They occurred just as representatives from both countries, along with international mediators, arrived in Geneva to initiate a fresh round of exploratory peace discussions. The meetings are not formal treaty negotiations, but rather confidence-building and framework-setting talks aimed at identifying potential areas of compromise. To understand the gravity of this moment, it is essential to revisit the broader context. The current phase of war began in February 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine following years of rising tensions after the 2014 annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of fighting in eastern Ukraine. Diplomatic efforts since then have repeatedly stalled. Early talks in 2022 failed to produce lasting ceasefires. Subsequent mediation attempts by various international actors achieved limited humanitarian agreements but no comprehensive settlement. Over the past year, the conflict has evolved into a war of attrition. Front lines have shifted slowly. Both sides have invested heavily in drone warfare, precision strikes, and air defense systems. Ukraine has increasingly demonstrated the ability to conduct long-range strikes into Russian territory using domestically developed or modified drone systems. Russia, meanwhile, has continued sustained missile and drone campaigns targeting Ukrainian infrastructure. The strategic calculus for both governments has become more complex. Ukraine seeks to maintain international support while demonstrating resilience and capability. Russia aims to consolidate territorial control and pressure Kiev into concessions, while signaling endurance to both domestic and international audiences. Geneva's involvement introduces another layer. Switzerland has hosted numerous diplomatic efforts in the past, offering a neutral venue for dialogue. However, neither side has publicly indicated a willingness to compromise on core demands. Ukraine insists on territorial integrity and sovereignty. Russia has maintained its position regarding the status of annexed territories. What then led to the decision to convene talks at this moment? Several factors appear to be at play. Continued battlefield stalemate has imposed significant costs on both sides. International partners have quietly encouraged dialogue. Economic pressures, though uneven, remain present, and broader geopolitical concerns, including the risk of escalation and strain on global markets, have created incentives for at least exploratory engagement. Yet as missiles continue to fly, the credibility of negotiations faces immediate scrutiny. To assess whether Geneva can influence the trajectory of this war, we must first examine the military developments unfolding alongside these diplomatic efforts. The most recent exchange of attacks highlights a continued shift toward long-range strike capabilities and asymmetric warfare tactics. On the Ukrainian side, officials reported intercepting multiple Russian drones and missiles targeting energy facilities, airfields, and logistical centers. Russia has relied extensively on a combination of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and loitering munitions. These systems are designed not only to degrade military capacity but also to strain air defense resources and disrupt economic stability. Ukrainian air defenses, strengthened through Western-supplied systems and domestic production, have demonstrated improved interception rates in many regions. However, the scale and frequency of attacks present ongoing challenges. Energy infrastructure remains a strategic focus, particularly as seasonal conditions influence power demand. Simultaneously, Ukraine has expanded its use of long-range unmanned aerial vehicles capable of striking targets inside Russian territory. Russian authorities acknowledge drone incursions in several regions, including areas far from the immediate front lines. These strikes reportedly targeted fuel depots, ammunition storage sites, and transport nodes supporting military operations. From a tactical perspective, such strikes serve multiple purposes. They aim to disrupt supply chains, impose costs on Russia's defense industrial base, and demonstrate that distance from the front line does not guarantee security. Symbolically, they also reinforce Ukraine's narrative of resilience and capability. Russia, for its part, has continued efforts to fortify defensive positions in occupied territories while conducting limited offensive operations along contested front lines. Analysts note incremental advances in some sectors, though at significant material cost. Neither side has achieved a decisive breakthrough. The war remains characterized by attrition, adaptation, and technological experimentation. Drone warfare has become central, reducing the dominance of traditional armored maneuvers and emphasizing reconnaissance, precision, and electronic countermeasures. In this environment, military actions occurring during peace talks may reflect a strategic effort to negotiate from perceived strength. Maintaining operational tempo can shape leverage at the table. Official statements from Kiev and Moscow have reflected cautious rhetoric. Ukrainian leadership reiterated that participation in Geneva does not signal acceptance of territorial concessions. Government representatives described the talks as exploratory, focused on humanitarian corridors, prisoner exchanges, and confidence-building measures rather than immediate territorial settlements. Russian officials framed the discussions as an opportunity to address what they characterize as security concerns and regional stability. They have emphasized the need for recognition of new realities on the ground, a phrase widely interpreted as referring to territories currently under Russian control. International responses have been measured. European governments welcomed the initiation of talks but underscored continued support for Ukraine's sovereignty. The United States expressed cautious optimism while reaffirming security assistance commitments. Other global actors, including countries in Asia and the Middle East, have publicly supported dialogue while maintaining varying degrees of neutrality. The diplomatic positioning suggests that external stakeholders see value in maintaining negotiation channels, even if immediate breakthroughs appear unlikely. Financial markets reacted with restrained volatility. Energy prices experienced modest fluctuations, reflecting concerns about potential supply disruptions, but also recognition that major export routes remain operational. The war has already reshaped global energy flows. Europe has diversified away from Russian pipeline gas, increasing liquefied natural gas imports and accelerating renewable investments. Russia has redirected energy exports toward Asian markets, often at discounted rates. Continued cross-border strikes introduce uncertainty, particularly if infrastructure related to energy transit or refining becomes more frequently targeted. Insurance costs for shipping and logistics in the region have risen periodically in response to perceived risk levels. Sanctions remain in place, affecting banking, technology transfer, and trade in dual-use goods. Additional sanctions have been discussed but not yet announced in direct response to this latest exchange of attacks. Economic pressure alone has not compelled resolution, but it continues to shape strategic decision-making. NATO has maintained a posture of vigilance, reinforcing eastern flank deployments and conducting exercises aimed at deterrence. The alliance has avoided direct involvement in combat operations, but has expanded training and support for Ukrainian forces. The European Union continues to coordinate sanctions and financial assistance packages. Discussions regarding long-term reconstruction planning have advanced, even as active fighting persists. At the United Nations, calls for ceasefire and humanitarian access have been reiterated. However, structural limitations within the Security Council have constrained formal resolutions addressing enforcement mechanisms. Neighboring countries monitor developments closely. Nations bordering Ukraine and Russia have strengthened border security and civil defense preparedness, reflecting concerns about potential spillover risks. The broader global community remains attentive to escalation risks, particularly given the involvement of major military powers and the implications for nuclear deterrence frameworks. The simultaneous occurrence of intensified attacks and diplomatic engagement underscores a defining feature of modern warfare. Negotiation does not necessarily require a pause in combat. Instead, military and diplomatic tracks often proceed in parallel, each influencing the other. Strategically, this moment matters because it reflects a potential inflection point in the conflict's trajectory. After years of sustained warfare, both sides face resource constraints, domestic political considerations, and international pressures. For Europe, the war has transformed security architecture. Defense spending has increased significantly across multiple countries. Finland and Sweden's NATO membership expansion has altered regional dynamics in Northern Europe. Military doctrines are being reassessed, with greater emphasis on air defense, cyber capabilities, and unmanned systems. For Russia, the conflict has accelerated economic realignment toward non-Western partners. It has also prompted adjustments in defense production and mobilization structures. For Ukraine, sustained resistance has strengthened ties with Western allies but also increased dependence on external military and financial support. Globally, the war has influenced perceptions of deterrence, sovereignty, and alliance credibility. It has highlighted vulnerabilities in supply chains and underscored the interconnectedness of energy and security. If Geneva produces even incremental confidence-building measures, it could signal that prolonged attrition is creating space for pragmatic engagement. Conversely, if talks collapse amid intensified strikes, the risk of broader instability could rise. This is not merely a bilateral dispute, it is a test case for how major conflicts are managed in a multipolar world. A path toward de-escalation would require several conditions. First, both sides would need to perceive that continued attrition offers diminishing returns relative to negotiated compromise. This perception could stem from battlefield stalemate, economic strain, or shifting domestic political priorities. Second, confidence-building measures would need to precede comprehensive agreements. These could include localized ceasefires, humanitarian access expansions, prisoner exchanges, and agreements protecting critical infrastructure. Third, international mediators would need to craft security guarantees or monitoring mechanisms acceptable to both parties. Neutral oversight arrangements, phased implementation timelines, and reciprocal verification processes could reduce mistrust. However, barriers remain substantial. Core territorial disputes are deeply entrenched. Public opinion in both countries has hardened. Security assurances involve complex geopolitical trade-offs. A realistic de-escalation scenario might therefore begin with limited sector-specific agreements rather than an immediate comprehensive settlement. Gradual stabilization could follow, contingent on sustained political will. Escalation could occur through several pathways. A significant strike causing high civilian casualties or targeting critical infrastructure beyond previous thresholds could trigger expanded retaliation. Miscalculation, particularly involving cross-border incidents near NATO territory, could introduce additional actors into crisis management. Increased deployment of advanced weapon systems, expanded mobilization efforts, or intensified targeting of energy assets could broaden the conflict's economic and humanitarian impact. Regional expansion remains unlikely but cannot be entirely dismissed if alliance commitments are tested. Escalation would likely prompt further sanctions, increased defense spending, and heightened geopolitical polarization. Strategic calculations on both sides involve balancing deterrence with risk management. Neither government has signaled intent for direct confrontation with NATO, yet the margin for error narrows when hostilities persist at high tempo. Regardless of immediate outcomes, the war has already reshaped international relations. Alliances are adapting. NATO has expanded and recalibrated force posture. The European Union has pursued greater strategic autonomy in energy and defense sectors. Defense spending trends indicate sustained investment in missile defense, drone technology, and cyber capabilities worldwide. Countries beyond Europe are reassessing contingency planning based on lessons observed in Ukraine. Energy security strategies have diversified. Europe's reduced reliance on Russian gas has accelerated renewable deployment and LNG infrastructure expansion. Russia's pivot toward Asian markets has deepened economic ties with select partners. Global trade patterns have adjusted, with new supply routes emerging and sanctions influencing financial networks. Emerging powers observe the conflict closely, drawing conclusions about deterrence, alliance cohesion, and the limits of military coercion. Geneva's talks, even if limited, fit into this broader narrative. They represent an acknowledgement that prolonged war carries systemic costs extending beyond the immediate battlefield. As Ukraine and Russia exchange strikes while diplomats convene in Geneva, the world witnesses a complex intersection of force and dialogue. The military situation remains fluid, characterized by long-range strikes and incremental ground movements. Political rhetoric remains firm, yet channels of communication remain open. Economic impacts continue to ripple outward, influencing markets and energy flows. International actors maintain cautious engagement, balancing support with risk management. Whether Geneva becomes a stepping stone towards stabilization or another chapter in stalled diplomacy depends on calculations unfolding in real time, on battlefields, in cabinet rooms, and within domestic political landscapes. Two questions now stand at the forefront. Can sustained attrition create the incentives necessary for compromise, or will hardened positions prevail? And how might the choices made in the coming months redefine not only European security, but the broader global balance of power? We invite you to share your analysis respectfully in the comments. Thoughtful discussion remains essential in understanding complex geopolitical developments. Thank you for watching.